Good morning. Good morning. Very nice to be here. Well, tomorrow is Labor Day. And it's interesting that Labor Day is the one day of the year on which almost nobody labors. Now, while tomorrow is Labor Day, today is also a holiday. In 1909, the Convention of the American Federation of Labor passed a resolution adopting the Sunday preceding Labor Day as Labor Sunday, dedicated to the spiritual and educational aspects of the labor movement. So we don't have to wait until tomorrow for a holiday. We have one today. And what more appropriate way to spend a day that's devoted to the spiritual and educational aspects of something than in a spiritual center discussing spiritual ideas. Now, many people don't believe that they should have the best in life. And much of this happens subconsciously. With the subconscious mind, they'll say, yes, I believe I should have the best in life. But with the subconscious mind, they may not believe it at all. And there have been many reasons why so many people have believed this. It's been their thinking, it's been their reasoning, it's been their pattern. And so therefore, when something good tries to appear in their experience, it finds no acceptance. It can't come in. It can't come through channels that are blocked by the belief that it's too good to be true. Now, in this teaching, we start out with the belief that the universe gives its entire self to us. And as much of this as we can accept, we can use. Now, Dr. Ernest Holmes wrote, "It is the nature of spirit to give. Spirit is the essence of life as well as the intelligence back of everything. It is all power and all presence. We have nothing to offer nature other than a willingness to cooperate with her laws. If we are to demonstrate that the divine givingness is a principle in the universe, then we must set up a receiving center. For no matter how abundantly the horn of plenty may pour out its universal gifts, there must be a bowl of acceptance, a chalice of expectancy, or the gift cannot be complete." And when I was reading this over last few days, I could have kicked myself because I said, I should have called this talk the bowl of acceptance. So, well, maybe next time. But I like that, and it's so apt, and it so describes what we have to have, a bowl of acceptance to accept this good that's always flowing over us. Now, we're interested in taking the best out of life. Always remember that the universe wants you to have what you want as long as it's ethical and moral. But from an early age, most people are conditioned to think just the opposite. For example, it's rare for a child to be told it can have everything. It's almost always told things like that you'll have to work hard to get anything at all. Or the old favorite, money doesn't grow on trees. Well, I don't know, I think I said that to my board of trustees a few times. No, I try to avoid it. But money doesn't grow on trees. Now, some of you probably remember Jerry Gillies. Back in the 70s, 80s, he wrote a book and had a series of talks called Money Love. And before I go on, I should, say I'm aware of his personal difficulties, and I'm aware that he made a terrible mistake and did something very stupid and spent time in prison. But I also have believed for a long time that we have to separate the message from the messenger. And if the message is good and the message is sound, then we look at that and not whether or not the messenger has lived up to it completely or demonstrated it completely. And the ideas in his Money Love book and that series of tapes are very, very good. At any rate, in there, he tells a story of a friend of his who set up, she was dealing with this whole business of how children are brought up in limitation. She didn't want to do that with her kids. So she set up a decorative glass tree on the dining room table with different denominations of bills hanging on it. Ones, 5, 10s, 20s. And she told her children, when you need money, take what you need from the money tree. And so she raised them with this idea that the abundance was there, and that if they needed something, that there would be the substance there to take care of it. Or we're told that life is not easy, or that the world is out to get you. And worse, if you were brought up in the old kind of religion, you were probably taught that the three enemies are the devil, the flesh, and the world. Well, I can tell you there is no devil. There's nothing inherently evil about the flesh. And the world isn't out to get you because the world is impersonal. It can only react. It's a field of reaction, a field that takes form according to the directions mind gives it, and you are mind capable of directing it. Now we're going to increase our level of acceptance, since that's the key, and you can start doing it right now. When we're all through here today, if someone says, well, let me take you to lunch, then say yes. And I'm not fishing for invitations to lunch because, as some of you know, I have a very long drive home and I usually don't linger anyway. But many people do this, and you shouldn't be one of them. Now, in our everyday living, we probably reject more good than we could ever realize. People ask us these things and we say, well, I'd like to, but I'm too tired. I'd like to, but. I'd like to, but. Then after a while, people start to think, well, why should I bother to invite him or her out again? They're only not going to go. And so eventually you end up with poor little me. No one loves me, and all your friends are gone. And when you meet them on the street, they're all very, very nice, but they never ask you to do anything anymore. And then comes the hurt, the rejection pattern, and the entire cycle begins all over again. I'd like to do that, but. And the thing is, this is largely an unconscious response. And then later on, you might think, well, why did I answer that way? Why did I answer that way? I don't want to do that. See, we're made to be a circulation of life, and this starts in the mind. It starts with relationships to people and events. The fullness of life means participation. It means a give and a take, and isn't at all a retreat. So if you want to raise your level of acceptance, you need the circulation of ideas, circulation of activities, circulation of joy, of love, of people in your life. Because the easiest thing to do is to retire from life and build your nice little comfortable walls around you. Have just about enough money to live on, have a TV, have a radio. Now, you don't need a phone, since you're not going to be talking to anybody anyway. And have a lot of books that you bought at church and never had time to read. I'm embarrassed to confess I have many of those too. And besides, it's just so comfortable right there in your house. But eventually you discover that that's actually a living death, because what you've done is to move out of what life really is. And we all have our excuses for doing this. But life isn't stagnant. Life is flow, and we're equipped to flow with it. Now, the fine art of accepting is the ability to use what we might call a yes-no system. because you can't say yes to everything and you can't say no to everything. Yes and no are two of the most important words we have, because yes is an affirmative action that opens and releases the mind, and no is a negative action which closes the mind and prevents either action or inaction. And from the moment we get up in the morning to the moment we fall asleep at night, we're using a yes-no system. Consciously or unconsciously, we're making these decisions all the time. So what's your tendency to take in life or reject life? Remember that there's no power in your world except the power of your mind, and that's always operating. And then every once in a while, sit down and ask yourself, well, what am I saying yes to, and what am I saying no to? Now, if we want a richer experience, and I mean richer in every respect, not just money, but in every area of life, we first have to have a richer something within us to produce it around us. We have to have something within us growing and unfolding in order to have something around us growing and unfolding, because nothing can happen to us except what happens through us. And if nothing can happen to us except what happens through us, then by our yeses and nos, we can let happen what we want and stop what we don't want. Now, there's only one way to use mind, and that's to think. And importantly, since our thinking is so often influenced by our emotions, we need to be emotionally happy. And not just a surface optimism, but a depth optimism, a depth happiness. Now, some people say, well, how can you say that and do that in these times? It's always these times. But actually, these times aren't really bad at all. If you read about what life was like 100 years ago, or 500, or 1,000, you begin to realize that we actually have it pretty good in these days. In 2015, the International New Thought Alliance had their 100th anniversary. And I thought it would be a good idea to speak on that. And so as part of the talk, I started thinking, well, what were things like in this country when the INTA was started? So I read about what life was like in the United States in 1915, and the differences were absolutely dramatic. And what life was like in 1915 when the organization was founded, and then later during its 100th anniversary. Well, nevertheless, people then go on to recite all the negatives of the world about which they can do nothing at all. They talk about all these things about which they can't do anything. And so if there's a negative in the world about which you can take no constructive action, then don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. You don't want to keep your mind loaded with negatives you can do nothing about. Where's the value in that? There's no value in that. There's only harm in that. But even that list isn't as large as you might think. Even if you can't be involved with something directly, for example, you can send your money to those who can. In his booklet, Money is God in Action, Dr. Raymond Charles Barker included a quote about this by the Reverend Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick. And Fosdick wrote, "A dollar is a miraculous thing. It is a man's personal energy reduced to portable form and endowed with powers the man himself does not possess. It can go where he cannot go, speak languages he cannot speak, lift burdens he cannot touch with his fingers, save lives with which he cannot directly deal, so that a man busy all day downtown can at the same time be working in boys' clubs, hospitals, settlements, child care centers all over the city. But people like to use the world as an excuse for their problems. So we're told about the troubled times. No matter what's really happening in the times, we're told about the troubled times. Because most people want to blame their lack of acceptance of the good on something that's outside of themselves, and the troubled times of the world serve this purpose wonderfully. So what should we do? Well, we can start by having some sense that everything in our little world of experience is all right. And then we can say, I'm a circulating, vital expression of life, love, and wisdom, and that I am what my mind is, and my mind is what I've put into it, that it's spiritually equipped to demonstrate the best in life, but I first have to accept the best in life in order to experience it. And then reject statements like, it will never happen to me, it's too good to be true, and all of that, because although they aren't true, since we've accepted them as truths, they're going to operate as truths, because we've accepted them that way and believed them. Well, I'll conclude with this from Dr. Ernest Holmes. He wrote, we should contact a larger field of faith. This is done by understanding that God is the giver and sustainer, and the sustainer of human life and expression. God is all there is. He is substance and supply. We must learn to accept this. If it is God's good pleasure to give us the kingdom, then it should be our privilege to accept the gift. We should endeavor to stop limiting God. All things are given unto us, but we shall have to do the taking. God gives in the abstract, we receive in the concrete. The gift of heaven is forever made. The receiving of this gift is an eternal process of forever expanding the finite. And so ends the lesson.